Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Duke with Freedom Project Media, together again with Alex Newman, correspondent and raconteur of the Newman Report on our media site. Glad to have you with us again, Alex. And another interesting article from you about something that, as a professor myself, I've seen going on for years, but now it's starting to creep down into the middle and high schools. Grade inflation, kids getting artificially passed on. Talk a little bit about your article.
Well, thanks very much, Duke. It's great to be with you. And, this is not a new phenomenon, as you just pointed out and as you know well. But what's been happening, and now we have, a study and some findings dealing with it from two research professionals, one from the College Board and a graduate student who looked into this. And basically, teachers are handing out A's now like candy, so to speak. They're giving A's to students who are much, much dumber than kids in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, even in the 90s. And it's having the effect of graduating a bunch of students who really don't know much of anything. So then they get to college and they don't know much of anything, and then their college professors give them A's for work that is, not worthy of an A. An A today is actually the most common grade. And so while all this is happening, we have the objective data to show that the students are actually getting dumber. So they're getting better grades, but on the S.A.Ts, for example, their scores are declining, so much so that the College Board keeps having to recenter the test so that they can keep the average about the same and conceal this. So grade inflation is the term they've used, and it's absolutely insane, but people who have looked into this were already pretty well aware of it.
Well, this is a vicious cycle. It really is, in the sense that you and I have talked a lot about social justice education. And I think this proves our point. This really does underscore what we've been warning parents about, that the curriculum has changed. We are no longer measuring serious performance in math, reading, science. We've watered the curriculum down under things like Common Core, the common in Common Core. We want kids to be at the same level, which means we have to try to cut off the highs and lows. It's much easier to cut off the high-achieving kids and lower them than it is, after 50 years of trying, to get the lowest-performing kids up. So what's happened now, and I think this is interesting in proving our thesis about social justice education, the premise of the classroom now is primarily about squishy social issues, getting kids to conform, getting their worldview to become progressive, getting them to practice tolerance as defined by liberals. And so how do you give kids bad grades in subjects that don't really matter all that much, reading, writing, and math, when all kids who smile and show up to class and parrot liberal talking points, they all deserve A's now? And this has something to do with it as well, doesn't it?
That is absolutely right, Duke, and you know as well as I do that we're increasingly moving toward this total reshape of education. And this is really what John Dewey had in mind 100 years ago when he was setting up this architecture. But to have come out and just announced it at that time, he probably would have been tarred and feathered. So now we're seeing the end result of this, where increasingly the schools are worried about social and emotional learning, right? How well does the student accept homosexual marriage? How well does the student accept feminism, abortion, multiculturalism, progressive ideology, globalism, world citizenship, all these different values and attitudes that they want their kids to have. And whether they can read or write or do math, that's really not important from the point of view of these people. So education has completely been flipped upside down. It has nothing to do anymore with what people traditionally think of as education. And unless people do something, this trend is going to continue until really all they're measuring is how well the child conforms with the ideological blinders that the establishment wants them to wear.
And we are beginning to see how transparently socialist this all is. Back when we used to teach kids competitive math and reading and science and history, there were a range of grades, right? Not every kid was an A kid. In fact, few kids were A students, but not every kid was an F student either. The kids fell the old bell curve, right? Kids fell somewhere in the middle. And C was an average grade, whereas an A now is the pretty much prototypical average grade. And this is the socialist argument. We've eliminated competition. It is unfair for kids to compete for valedictorians, to compete for honors programs. It's unfair for kids to compete for math prizes because that's unjust, right? This is the Marxist argument, right? That any nakedly individualistic differences among kids, those are signs of discrimination. And so what have we replaced it with? A non-competitive system where conformity and worldview, groupthink, are what we're measuring. And if that's the argument, then why not just do away with grades altogether? As a matter of fact, I predict within 10 years, you will see a major movement at the middle, high school, and elementary level to just do away with grades altogether.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. In Sweden, they actually already did away with grades up until you hit the 7th grade. So the kids no longer get grades. As long as they're absorbing sufficient doses of the indoctrination, there's no need for grades, right? Why have competition and individualism and hard work? We don't need those things. We just need them to accept the worldview we want them to accept. And it's a dangerous, dangerous thing. People aren't thinking through the consequences of this. Who's going to solve the very real world problems that we as a species are going to be dealing with in 20 years? Well, certainly not the kids graduating from government schools today.
Well, and that brings me up to my final observation here, is that this is a vicious cycle, as we said at the outset, because as you just pointed out, rather than holding firm, the S.A.T. is dumbing down. They're adjusting their exams down. What's happening at colleges and universities is under the name of social justice, right? We're taking more and more kids to public universities who don't belong. Because that's the socially just thing to do. You turn nobody away, particularly minority inner city kids who may not have the preparation or the ability to succeed at typical college level standards. You've got to lower the standards for them. As a professor myself, I've said this before, about 4 out of 10 of my students every semester, 40% don't belong. Either they cannot do the work, and that's probably about 20%, 25%. They just intellectually aren't prepared to do it, or they attitudinally won't do it. They just won't. And so 4 out of 10 kids, but I can't fail 40% of my students. Because if I were to do that, that's 40% of meal plans unsold, 40% of dorm beds empty. A university would be down on me like a ton of bricks. And so where are the standards here? At every level now, we're jettisoning standards. Standards and competition in the name of this squishy feel-good paradigm that's going to leave us an intellectually, morally, and civics-based bankrupt nation.
That's exactly right. And, I tremble to think about the consequences of this in 10 or 20 years. It's going to be an absolute disaster. The older generations who actually do have the knowledge, who do have a sound moral foundation, are slowly dying off. And replacing them are these kids who, don't know right from wrong, don't even believe in right and wrong, and, couldn't find their way out of a paper bag. So it's going to be, interesting times ahead if we don't get this turned around.
And what, of course, as you know, this mindset breeds is, besides titanic ignorance, a shocking sense of entitlement from kids used to getting A's for doing nothing. Alex, thanks again for being with us. Another fantastic takeaway, great article. Look forward to being with you again next week. If you enjoyed this video and all of our videos, please consider a tax-deductible donation so we can keep the whole thing free for you. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.